sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network? Good afternoon. Welcome to the Spiritual Broadcast Network and the Afternoons with Ed show. Here's your host, Ed King.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, it's a pleasant day in Sarasota. It's always very nice in this time of the year here. You guys have a little coolness in the air sometimes. I got a little gardening done this morning. And George asked me how I was feeling. I said, well, you don't feel, my age, you don't feel top-notch all the time anyway, so you have to just live with it. I was having a hard time trying to think of something to talk about today. And some of it may be repetitive because there's some things that, I'm more interested in others. But I thought I might talk a little bit about history to start with. And, the first thing, I think what triggered this mostly was the fact that I was watching, I was doing my email, and a guy sent an email. And he was lauding the prosperity we had of the 1920s in the United States, and why couldn't we go back to that wonderful time? Well, this poor chap does not have a very good grasp of history, obviously, because even though I lived through that time, I was a child, and I do have some memories of the 1920s. I remember hanging around with my oldest sister. She used to drag me all over with her, and also I remember a number of things. It's kind of funny because I have a great memory. I can remember things. I have one memory and I've authenticated it of something that happened when I was 2 years old. I don't have much further recollection after that, except that. One of the things I did, I must have been kind of a nasty little kid sometimes. My poor older sister that was so good to me as a child, she was 14 years older than me. One time I cut her almost brand new coat. Now, why I would do that, something like that, I don't know, because I wasn't angry with her. Another time on the dining room table, there was some legs in the center of the table, so when they extended it, and there was a little crossbar up there, and I took a pair of her shoes and hid them up there. Now, why I would do things like that, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a nasty person by nature, I don't know. But the 1920s were not a good time. The 1920s were all falsehood. We had the big stock market boom, and everybody, even the bootleg blacks, the guy that shined your shoes, was investing in the stock market, as they say. It was all bought on margin. You only had to have 10% down, and 90% of it, you borrowed the money to buy these stocks. And, of course, it ended up with the almighty fiasco in 1929 when the stock market crashed with a big, big boom. And in the ensuing aftermath, of course, was the Great Depression. And this is another thing. I talk to people a lot, and they have no comprehension of what went on in the Great Depression. If I was just reading about it in history books, but I don't think people read very much anymore, and I suppose they don't read history, but unless you lived through those times, you don't have any recollection of what went on. I want to come back maybe to that. I'll stay with this for a while. The 30s were a time when I can remember the 1931, 32. I was about 10 years old at this time, and I remember my father painting the outside of the house, and going with him to collect rents at a rental property he had in Cleveland. And, we lived in a suburb, and apparently he had no problems then, but certainly subsequent to that, he had financial problems, which ended up with my family losing both of these two pieces of property, and we had to move. And of course, that's another thing. Everything was a secret. I didn't realize that my parents had lost the home. I just thought we were moving for one reason or another. And I think I've told this story before, but it's one of my favorites. We had this neighbor. She talked and looked a lot like the old actress in the movies, Marjorie Main, and I think that's her name. And she was Ma Kettle, Ma and Pa Kettle. And she comes over, and my mother's got all this stuff packed up. There's barrels. In those days, you used wooden barrels instead of the ones we use today. And boxes all full of stuff. And Mrs. Zimmerman says to my mother, appears to me that you're fixing to move. And my mother said, oh, no, just packing away a few things. And, keep secrets. That was the game. Back to history. I guess I may come back to the 30s, but back to history. There was a big spate of historical novels written in the 1930s and 40s. Some of them were historically accurate, and some of them were just kind of potboiler things. One of the friends I had in Columbus, Ohio, was a fellow by the name of Danny Sims. He's unfortunately, like most of my friends, has passed on, and he's not with us anymore. Danny was an architect, and his father was a famous architect before him. And Danny's mother's brother was Ben Ames Williams, who was a famous author. And he liked to write historical fiction, but he didn't get a whole lot of revenue out of it. So he would write a potboiler to get enough money to live on and research his novels. And, one of them was an old movie. They made it into a movie. It's called Leave Her to Heaven, about an evil woman. It was a very successful novel, and it was a very successful movie with Gene Tierney in it. And he would research these novels, and Danny said he would go up there and live with them sometimes in the summertime, and he would go out to research these, and they would go to these actual sites where this thing occurred, but they wouldn't stay there at night. There was always a limousine or a big car, driven, I think, by his wife, awaiting them at the after they had checked out this particular site. You would think that the guy would have camped out there, but evidently he didn't. There was a whole bunch of people writing these types of novels. You've probably seen the old movie Northwest Passage, and I can't think offhand a whole lot more. My mind is wandering all over the place this morning, and I think immediately thinking about Last of the Mohicans, but of course that preceded by a good many years. That was written many years ago, and it makes me think of Cooperstown, New York, and the Baseball Hall of Fame there, and they also have some other museums there. They have a farmers museum, so forth. And I said, this is the day of digression. I had a customer in one of my shops up north, and he was the curator of the Ohio Museum, and I'm reminded of that because I'm talking about farmers. And the museum primarily dealt in tools, out-of-date tools that the farmers would use. And this guy's name was Amos Loveday. That's really his name, and he was the curator there. And he told me this story. He told, and it's an urban fable, isn't it? A true story, because I've heard several more versions of it. he said he was out to this farm, and the fellow said to him, well, he said, I don't have anything I can give you to the museum. He says, because we use everything we have here, and we've gotten rid of anything that we don't use anymore. But he said, my son went into the service, and he was killed in an accident in the service, and he left his almost brand new 1953 Chevrolet here. And he said, I'll show it to you. And he takes him out to the barn, and it's up on blocks. And what do we got there? We got the very first line of Corvettes. Well, that'd be just worth a fortune. Even that long ago. I'm talking about, this guy told me the story maybe 30 years ago. But even so. So he said, well, what do you think you'd like for it? And he said, well, I'd like to get $500 for it. And he said, my other son is in town doing some shopping, and when he comes back, I'm buying feed or something. He said, when he comes back, I'll have him check with him to make sure. And supposedly the upshot of that was that he bought the thing for $500. I've heard other versions of that. Somebody said that there was an ad in the newspaper and said that they had a 53. Now, probably the 53 was what they called a 54 model, but it was like the Ford Mustang. It came out about 6 months before they changed the year. So, as I said, this I can easily digress today, which means that I don't have a lot to say, I guess. But when I think about history, I think mainly about Winston Churchill, one of my favorite characters of all time, and I probably have told this story. His grandson Winston Churchill, member of Parliament and so forth in England, was being interviewed, and he told a story about when he'd go down to Chartwell, the farm, where Churchill had his place, a country place, and they would go down to visit the pigs in the pig pen. And he said his grandfather would take this cane and rub the pig's nose. I think I've told this story before on this program, but I love the car story, so you're going to hear it again. And he said, Winston, I want to tell you something. He said, a dog looks up to man, and a cat looks down on man. But he said, a pig will always look you right in the eye. Now, there is the most non sequitur I have ever heard, but I just get a kick out of it. I have kind of a strange sense of humor, obviously. Churchill was a very remarkable man, and he has what I think is probably a bum reputation of drinking too much. Think about it. This is a man that not only pulled a nation together in time of extreme stress when everything looked hopeless. He wrote, I think I remember. I have the set. There's 5 or 6, and I have not read all of them. History books about one of them, for example, is called "The Coming Storm," and it's all about the lead up to World War II. He wrote all these books. I'm sure he had some help with that. Probably dictated all of them. And he probably had a lot of help in the research and so forth. But still, writing 6 of those books, and that's all he wrote, is a monumental task. He also was an extremely talented artist. His paintings are wonderful if you've ever seen a reproduction of any of them. Another thing he did, he built a brick wall down at Chartwell, and in England it's so labor-related that he had to join the Masons group. He had to get I don't think he served as an apprentice, but he did have to join the union to lay those bricks, even though he was laying his own bricks on his own property. But when I think of Churchill, of course, I think about all the things in England. And again, I may be repeating myself on some of this stuff, but the interesting thing, I think, is that when we decided to have Social Security here, we picked out the retirement age of 65. And this originally figure came from Bismarck, who had the first type of Social Security thing in Europe, in Germany, back in the 1800s, the late 1800s. And that, of course, was determined there because that apparently was, although it seems like an awful lot, the life expectancy of a male. But there you get into another thing about life expectancy, and I can talk about that. But back to Churchill, here's a man that it's just amazing. Now, Churchill, believe it or not, did not have a good childhood. His father virtually ignored him completely. He would buy him toy soldiers, and that was about the extent of his interaction with his son. He was very close to his mother, as he might be called a mama's boy. He was sent to school where these people that educated these young men in these so-called private schools, which are really public schools, which are really private schools, the masters must have been a lot of sadists because they enjoyed beating these kids. Churchill had an awful lot of problem in school. Now, here's a guy with a brilliant mind, but he has a problem in school. Now, who do you think is wrong? Not the kid, it's the masters. You've seen movies where these guys, they take a cane and they take a run and whack a guy in the butt. Amazing things. I had mentioned in one of the previous shows about the program downstairs, and there's another show, Downton Abbey, which deals with the working conditions of the poorer people. I think I mentioned again in the previous program that one of the surprising things is, despite all these social reforms in England, the average person who wasn't a gentleman, and the definition of a gentleman is a person who never works for a living. They might do some government work or something like that. I don't know whether they get paid for that or a token payment, $1 a year man or something. But the disparity between these people were, I think it was in the early 20s when the average person, man on the street, and got to vote. You had to own land, I believe it was, that you had to own land if you were going to vote. So I suppose some of the merchants, people like that, would get to vote because they'd probably have a substantial home that they owned. The women in England did not get to vote until 1928. This is, to me, is amazing because it's such a socially conscious thing. One of the things that, of course, it could digress and lead into socialized medicine, so-called at this point, but I'm not going to do that today. It's interesting that you can't always depend on the written word in history, and especially you can't read some of this, you can't pay attention to or believe. You have to take with a grain of salt a lot of the stuff that comes across in television. I got fooled with one of them, and I was disseminating this wrong information. This has nothing to do with history, but one night Johnny Carson was hosting his show, and he had Lee Marvin on there. Of course, you know, Lee killed himself with alcohol when he was right around 60 years old. But one heck of an actor and character. Of course, he's on there and he's half looped, and he said, and he had a Purple Heart. He got he was going up this hill in Okinawa, I think it was, and he got shot, and so he got a Purple Heart. And I think Carson said something about this particular thing, and he said. And he said, but I said, I never was the hero that, I can't think of the man's name now, but he played Captain Kangaroo. And he said he was a real hero. And he said, not all another guy. He said that Mr. Rogers. He said, he was he was a marksman. He was a sniper in the service. And I was telling people about that. I said, isn't that remarkable? And come to find out that it's not true at all. Now, Marvin's Purple Heart is true, but the rest of it is a pure fable. Urban fables are a lot of fun, really. I'm going to take a look at some notes I made here. History gets dated. That's one of the things. I've read a couple of histories that, Mark Sullivan wrote a history of the 1920s. And another guy, George, he must have been a relative of yours. What was his name? Frederick Allen Lewis. And I recently reread part of one of his so-called history books, and it was about the 20s. And, of course, it's so dated because they're looking at, and then they predict the outcome of what's going to happen. And, of course, it doesn't work out that way, and they get totally misguided. I lost myself. Historians differ a great deal on their interpretations of things. When I was in the Army, they decided to send me to college. I guess they had drafted too many people. I don't know. They picked some of us and sent us to college. They first sent me to the University of Illinois, and everybody says Champaign. It's actually in the town of Urbana, outside of Champaign. And we lived in the ice rink there. We were all jammed together in the ice rink. And we took a few courses there, and then later I was sent to the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Beautiful campus. So it's situated in the town of Madison, Wisconsin. Is surrounded by 4 small lakes. Well, they're fairly good-sized lakes, really, but they're not like the Great Lakes. They're good-sized lakes. It's surrounded by water, these lakes. I remember we went out on a pass one Saturday night, and we went to a nightclub on across one of the lakes, and we got there by speedboat. You could take a taxi cab, but it was a long taxi cab ride around the roads, but you could take a cheap boat ride across the thing to go to this nightclub. But back to history. One of the courses I took there was history, and the setup was that we had a lecture period, and most of the classes, we hadn't all the classes, but in history we had the lecture, and then we would have a sort of an informal lecture thing with a smaller group of us instead of this big mass of people in this amphitheater type of setting. And these two historians had some very divergent attitudes about stuff. The one fellow said that you could get all you want to know about history in the newspapers. Ho, ho, ho. How wrong was he? The other guy, of course, that I agree with, he said, no, you can't, because the newspapers of in the past have all been slanted one way or another. And, you think about the things that were written about Abraham Lincoln that I've talked about before. They portrayed him very badly and vilified him. Think where we'd be without that man. But what I'm saying here is that you can't believe everything you read. I'd like to believe everything I read, especially when it's something that I agree with, but it doesn't make it right. History, I am completely mystified by the historical aspects of the Bible, for example. One of the things that I read about the history of the Bible, of course, we all know, I think, although some people don't seem to know this, that this was actually oral history originally, and it was passed from person to person, generation to generation, pass it down. Things, if I tell somebody something today and he passes along, he embellishes it or diminishes it or does something with it, and the next person passes it on, it all gets all bollocksed up. And so you just can't depend on this type of thing. And George just gave me a signal that I lost my concentration. Life is great and wonderful. I just have to say that. I'm going to look and see if where I was going here with this. I hopefully. I was talking. It's kind of interesting because there was a young man who was that I ran into that was taking. He's about 40 years old, I think now. That's young to me. I guess it's middle-aged to most people. But he's taking a course, and they were studying the history of the robber baron era in the late 1800s. And I said, well, we've gone through the same thing and only a slightly less onerous, or not onerous, but less drastic outcome just recently because of some of the same abuses that crept back in, even though there were rules against them. But I suggested that he read a book that dealt with it's a book called Looking Backwards by James. The last man is Bellamy, and it was written in I think 1890. And he tells about what was going on there then. Of course, it was really horrible. People were just not attending to any type of rule at all, just none. And so the things were bad. But the thing that I really wanted to talk about there is that I had suggested some collateral reading to him, and this was one of the books I suggested that he read that he would find most interesting. He's never read the book because it's an out-of-print book. It's hard to find. I have a copy. I told him I'd loan him the copy, but I wanted to be sure I got it back because I don't know if I could ever find another one. The book is it's okay, but I think again I've talked about that briefly on the program. I'm getting pretty much out of time. I want to talk about one other thing that has nothing to do with anything else. But I had the misfortune of getting myself into the bar business in Columbus, Ohio, a great number of years ago. This is in the 1960s. Worst 5 years I ever spent in my life dealing with a bunch of people that are all dysfunctional. But I had the pleasure of meeting a man that was a beer salesman, and he didn't drink. Now, some of the people that sold beer and whiskey would come in and they'd buy people around the drinks, and of course, everybody would go from drinking cheap beer to the top shelf when the salesperson came in. But this man was my beer salesman. He later got up in the ranks of the employment. He got a job with some kind of a steel company. His name was Vic Janowitz. I had the pleasure of watching Vic Janowitz play football at Ohio State. He was a Heisman Trophy winner in 1950. This is the most incredible athlete I have ever seen. He's a fantastic guy. How much time I got, George? Okay, 1 minute. I can finish this up. Vic, I saw him play Iowa in 1950. Vic Janowitz was the kickoff. This is in the days when we played football both ways. There was no this free substitution stuff. And you played both offense and defense. And back in 1940, when I played freshman football at John Carroll, that's the way we played. It get kind of grueling. Vic kicked off. He recovers the fumble. He runs for a touchdown. He kicks off again. He throws a pass for a touchdown. They kick off again, and so on. He kicked field goals. He did the point after touchdown. He was a bear on defense. This is a man that weighed about 180 to 85 pounds and 5'9.5" or so. He was pretty much the same